Hello, everyone. My name is Crystal Shaughnessy. I am an event specialist here at EDB. I will be your host today for our webinar, Break Free from Oracle, Proven Strategies for Migrating Databases to Postgres. I am joined by Matt Lewandowski, Field CTO, and Mark Linster, CTO at EDB. Before I turn it over, I just want to briefly go through a few housekeeping items. Firstly, this presentation is being recorded and we will be sharing the recording along with the slides after the broadcast. Additionally, the lines are currently muted. If you have a question, please feel free to submit it in the question panel. We expect the presentation to last most of our time today, but we will allot any extra time for Q&A. If we do not have time to address all questions, we will follow up afterwards with any attendee whose question was not answered. I'll now hand it over to Matt and Mark to kick us off.
All right. Thank you, Crystal. So we'll take you through hopefully an interesting agenda for the next 45 minutes or so, and then we'll leave enough time for a Q&A. So what we're going to go through is a little bit of discussion about why leave Oracle, why go to Postgres, a little bit about EDB, promise it won't be long. And then Matt's going to walk us through, how we do it, how we support all the operations, and some background material where you can read more about what we're proposing, how this works, etc. So let's go forward here. And I think we're going to start with two polls here, and we're going to share all the poll answers. So please participate. Let us know what you think. So Crystal, if you can fire up the first poll, please.
Yes. So the first question is, if you are considering a migration off of Oracle or another legacy database, what do you see as the biggest motivator behind the migration? Options are cost, business practice, open source initiatives, application modernization, technology consolidation, or other. We'll give you a couple seconds here to send those answers through.
Okay, what'd they say?
Okay, it looks like our top answer is cost, followed by other.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. That I would have expected a little bit more around application modernization, for example. So, okay, let's look at the next poll, please.
Sure. So question number 2 is, what do you see as the biggest challenge to migrating applications off of Oracle or another legacy database to Postgres? First being insufficient organizational alignment or buy-in, risk of not being successful, complexity and level of effort of database migration, application refactoring, or impact to existing staff. And again, we'll give you a couple of seconds to send your answers in. Okay. All right, so it's split between complexity and level of effort of database migration and application refactoring.
Okay, can you just, okay, all right, here, that's interesting. Yeah, and application refactoring is really, I think, a lot of what Matt will talk about, because with EDB Postgres Advanced Server, we have a good approach to really reduce the amount of refactoring and redevelopment that has to be done. So we already talked about it in the poll here. It sounds like on this call here, by far the majority is all about cost, and mostly Oracle's very high cost and restrictive and complicated contracts, and also things that drive cost is the fact that you're not necessarily free to do everything that you want to do, meaning like if you hook up a SAN, your license cost may change. You can't go to every cloud that you want to. So all of this often is reflected in terms of cost, but behind this may be also other considerations, often like innovation or consolidation, or coming up with a new future-proof platform. Okay, so let's go forward. So some of the obstacles, obviously migrations are hard, and migration is always something like it's, why do you do it? Why do you have to invest in just saving money? right? But often you want to invest in order to get greater flexibility, greater agility, to be able to go to the cloud, etc. So those are things that make migrations more difficult. And we'll talk about a systematic approach for how to do this and how to do it with potentially a lot less friction. The skill set, right? I mean, most of your co-workers will have invested significantly in 20, 25 years of Oracle skills, and they're really, really good at it. And why change, right? Isn't that risk? Does that mean, like, you know, with Postgres, is the phone going to ring all weekend? Are we all going to get fired because the database is going to freeze up? So there's a lot of that always plays in. And that's where, you know, training and evangelizing and going to meetups, etc., can help significantly. Troublesome contracts. Oracle's contracts are really, really good at making sure that it's difficult to migrate off for financial reasons. But again, we have partners, if you're interested, that we can get you in touch with, who are world champions at helping people get out of that kind of contract. And then you have applications that are designed for Oracle. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about here today. So how to deal with PLSQL, with packages, Oracle specific drivers, etc. We bring a lot of those tools to the table to make migrations easier. And also many of our tools address the Oracle skill set problem because they're oriented towards making migration from Oracle easier. So we have equivalents to Oracle Enterprise Manager. We have the Postgres Enterprise Manager. We have equivalents to their replication tools, etc. So it's relatively easy to establish a mapping and understand, oh, I used to do this in the Oracle loader. Well, I can do the same thing actually with the same script in the EDB loader, right? So there's really good tools available to reduce the impact of application changes, skill set changes, and many of the migration challenges. Let's go forward. Okay, so why go to Postgres? Well, you know, we're probably a little biased about Postgres, so we're probably not the best people to ask why you should go to Postgres because, you know, we're sort of religious about it. The thing is, it really does everything everywhere. And when we say that, it's because we know that Postgres is the #1 database on so many of the cloud platforms, for example. It's growing like a weed. If you look at adoption statistics from Stack Overflow or from the Cloud Native Computing Foundation or from many other surveys, you'll see that Postgres rules the roost. So it's really, really popular. It's popular for new app development. It's popular for analytics systems. It's popular for systems of engagement, edge solutions, operational data stores, data warehouses, or data marts, better data warehouses, stretches it a little bit. But it's really popular for a lot of solutions, and it works everywhere. On every cloud, on almost every operating system, can be deployed in virtual machines or Kubernetes. So it's really a pretty universal solution to the majority of problems that one solves today using databases. Sure. Okay, and you're not alone. I mean, we've been doing this now for 17 years. A lot of it focused on migrations, and you know, we've done this with many customers, and they're all driven by the same things, right? Cost savings obviously is the big output, but you know, that has a lot to do with digital transformation, replatforming, going to microservices, etc. Things that are just too difficult and too expensive to do with commercial platforms. Let's go forward. Okay, and then so why go to EDB? Let's go forward. Well, we've been doing Postgres for 17 years. Some of our team members that are with us have been doing Postgres since Postgres came into existence as an open source community since 1996. So we have people like Bruce Baumgen, for example, who's been driving the Postgres community with others together since then. So those folks really understand how Postgres works. and not just as a piece of software, but also how Postgres works as a community, as a movement, as an enabler for digital transformation. In all of that time, we've done significant contributions to Postgres. So some of them as EDB and some of them as Second Quadrant, which is a company that we acquired last year. And they also brought significant resources to the table in terms of great IP, some of it also important for the Oracle migration, but also a lot of skill sets and extensions into new geographies like Southern Europe and strength in Japan, for example. So we've been doing Postgres for many years, and this is reflected in some of the faces and the names that you see associated with EDB. Mike Stonebreaker, the initial creator of Postgres, is an advisor to EDB today. So he created Postgres over 30 years ago at Berkeley. Bruce Momjian has been with Postgres since Postgres became an open source database in '96. He, together with others, have been driving this forward as an open source movement. If you go to any Postgres conference or read anything on the Postgres hackers list, names like Peter Eisentraut, Robert Haas, Simon Riggs, Dave Page, and many others who work at EDB and have been working at EDB for many years will become, very, very popular. So it's important that you work with somebody who has this Postgres expertise, because it's not just when a bug occurs or when you have a problem, but it's also to help you drive Postgres where you want Postgres to go. There's always new things that data-driven companies want to do with their database. And it's important to have a partner who says, yeah, I get it. Let me go work on that. Whether it's in open source or whether it's in proprietary distribution, that partnership is important. And that's why the expertise is important, not just when things go bad. Let's go forward. Okay, and we bring a lot of stuff to the table in terms of 24/7 support, which is important, right? Because, you every once in a while need it. Postgres is very stable, but every once in a while things go bad, or, there's an operator error, whatever, you need help. And, we're uniquely positioned to provide that help 24/7. You need good tools because it's not just about the database. You need to monitor the database. You need to integrate the database. You need to make sure that the database is highly available. And then last but not least, the topic of today, Oracle migration and the compatibility with Oracle. Let's go forward. Okay. And then, we bring databases, tools, deployment platforms like Kubernetes, virtual machines, database as a service. All of that comes together with unparalleled expertise in Postgres. Let's forward. Okay, so how do we do it? Matt, up to you.
All right, thank you, Mark. And it was a good overview of Postgres and what EDB does. For Postgres, let's talk about migrations at this point. So earlier, Mark talked about some challenges, and I just want to look at some of the factors that you need to consider whenever you are about to do a migration. Most folks will focus on the database itself, the schemas, and the data. There are some other aspects to consider as well, but let's just look at the schemas. In there, you're going to have the tables and other storage type objects, indexes, and things like that. But also you need to think about the database code itself. And perhaps that is probably one of the biggest challenges, is if you have a lot of built-in database code in Oracle that will be written in PL SQL, then that's going to be more of a challenge to migrate those. Then you also have just the data types themselves, that Oracle has its own data types that may differ from what's available in Postgres, and you need to be able to map those two. And then there's syntax differences that Oracle provides, some conventions and some conveniences that differ from the SQL standard itself, that if you're running queries or performing operations in the database, you're probably taking advantage of those, and you will have to find a way to get those to work in Postgres. And all these lead to incompatibilities that may exist between Oracle and Postgres. And of course, the job of migrating is to be able to overcome those incompatibilities. There's also, from the data perspective, on one hand, it seems pretty straightforward. You have the tables in both databases set up, and you move the data from the source tables to the target tables. But there are some things to consider there. It's like, can you accommodate some downtime, or is your system such that it needs to stay more or less up and running the whole time? And the size of your database and that answers to your whether you can afford some downtime or not will often drive how you do a data migration. And so that will be more driven towards either bulk data loads, whether you need to support ongoing data loads, whether you need to support a fallback position. And then in those cases where you may have some incompatibilities, you may need to do some sort of transformation of the source data into a format that is works in the target database. So there may be some bit of ETL that's needed. And then finally, when you do the data migration, it's really important to know that all the data that you wanted to move from the source database was actually moved to the target database. And that's where some validation is required. Beyond just the stuff that's in the database that needs to move, things to consider is your infrastructure, the hosting environments, where you're at today, where you want to go in the future. That could be, today you may be on premises, but then you need to want to move to something in a cloud, maybe a DBaaS offering or something like that. Whether you're going to be deploying in virtual machines or Kubernetes or in the cloud. And then you need to think about, you've built up your application over time. And chances are you've put a lot of work into optimizing it. You'll need to think about that when you migrate to the target database into Postgres. You'll have to have some bit of optimization as part of that effort. And then you also need to think about your high availability requirements as well as other requirements like security and encryption and how you handle those things. And then something that you can't think of about a migration in isolation from the application that actually uses the database. So you will have probably code that's going to need to be changed. There'll be considerations about the languages that are being used for your application. Is that language available for Postgres? The good news is that Postgres supports a very wide array of languages to work with the database with. There's connectors that basically serve as drivers to the database that you'll need to think about. You'll need to think about the syntax of your SQL in your application code. And then, of course, performance and optimization of the application itself and indexing and things like that. So all factors that we need to consider as we think about migrations. A little while ago, this is from July of 2020, we did a survey of our customers and we asked them what their biggest obstacles when migrating Oracle databases. Cost actually was a small portion of all that. For them, the largest was migrating the data. But if you look at the yellow wedge and the green wedge there, that's moving your stored procedures and your proprietary drivers. Those add up to quite a bit as well. So data definitions was a little bit of an issue more than cost for them. But things that where you would have more incompatibility between Oracle and Postgres, those are contribute to a great deal to the challenges. So we've been, as Mark mentioned, we've been in business for 17 years, doing database migrations from Oracle to Postgres for over 15 years. And as we've been working with our customers, we've identified a journey that everybody goes through to get from their source Oracle database to a Postgres database. So the first step of the journey, obviously, is a decision to migrate. And this, there may be a desire to migrate, but the actual decision to do it really comes down to you have to have a business case for it, and there needs to be organizational alignment. If you have a desire to do it, but there's no organizational backing for it, the resources and the commitment to do it, chances are that you're not going to move forward very well. Once you've decided to migrate, then you need to do a bit of feasibility and analysis and looking at alternatives. And this is where you would review your application portfolio. You'll look at how what those applications that are important to you to move to another database and align those to your IT strategy. You'll probably these days you're thinking about cloud versus on-premise deployments. And then also you may be really interested in or have an initiative to embrace open source. And so you think about, do I want to migrate my current database to another platform, and if I do so, will I want to move to something open source like Postgres? Once you've done some sort of feasibility analysis and identified these are good applications, these can be moved with some effort, but not necessarily with a lot of great risk that they won't succeed, then you begin planning your migration. And this is where you prioritize the order in which you do your migrations. This is also where you might think about lift and shift versus replatforming or restructuring. Lift and shift meaning that there may be some applications that you want to move to a different hosting environment, but they're of a nature that you really can't migrate. You just have to run with the existing technology. So that would be a lift and shift type of migration. Whereas replatforming is that you would swap out the underlying database. So in this case, swapping out Oracle for Postgres, and then restructuring is an approach of, or refactoring is an approach of where you may have, like, say, a monolithic database that you want to break up into smaller microservices-based databases. So that isn't a classic migration. That's really a re-architecting and rethinking of your application. But there are some components to that will be similar to other migrations as well. So for the most part, we're going to talk about the rest of this presentation will be factoring, or will be focusing on replatforming type of migration. During the planning stage, you also will be needing to pay attention to your non-functional requirements of your target system. It's really important to have a good understanding of those so that you can come up with a high-level solution design. And then obviously a big part of planning your migration is just understanding how much effort it's going to take and the resources you need, and to plan for that accordingly. Once you've gone through some sufficient amount of planning, you'll actually start to do your migrations. And this is where you'll move your database schema, your code, and your data. In the data, you'll have options of whether that's going to be a snapshot, one-time data load, or whether you need to support some sort of ongoing change data capture based type of replication or not. And the code itself, that's going to be that PL SQL objects. If we're talking about Oracle, you need to be able to move those to Postgres. And then once you've got the database moved, you need to move your application components, your interfaces, your connectors. You need to look at the SQL that's embedded in your applications and make sure that it'll work in the migrated system. And then there's some other types of migration efforts associated with the applications themselves that you'll have to undertake. Something that's related to the application and the database, but not necessarily, it's its own separate thing, I should say, is that you may have reports that you've built up either for the business or for management and monitoring and such of the database itself. And as well as you might have utilities and scripts. So in Oracle, let's say you have SQL Plus scripts that you've built up. You need to be worried about how you migrate those as well. Some of them may not be applicable in the Postgres world, but others will. And chances are you're going to have reports that are important to the business that you also need to migrate. And once you've done the migration, you'll have a more comprehensive test. Along the way, as you go through each of these stages, especially in the migration phases, you will have done some level of testing as you go through this, but something more comprehensive at the end of all that to validate your data, also to validate the functionality of the migrated database, as well as the functionality of the application itself, and then validate the performance meets your criteria. And then finally, once you've got the results of your test and you've started to refine your system so that it works the way you want it to do, you'll be optimizing and configuring that system. And this is where your database tuning, your query tuning, any tweaks to the application settings to tune it better to work with Postgres, you will be undertaking during this step. And this is where you would also finalize or address your high availability and your disaster recovery and security and authentication requirements that you identified while you were planning. So this kind of gets the system ready for operations at that point. And at that point, you are ready to do a cutover. Oftentimes what we've seen is that customers will want to maintain a fallback position, meaning that they want to cut over to Postgres. They want to let the system sort of have a burn-in period and verify that it actually works the way they want. In the meantime, they need to have the data that's being pumped into the Postgres system be fed back to Oracle as a fallback in case they need to go back to that. So you'll have a rollback setup as part of all that. You probably will be doing that as some sort of ongoing CDC-based replication back to the Oracle database. But at some point, you'll get to a point where you'll say that the system is ready to go, and you'll basically switch over at that point and begin full operations within the Postgres world. So that's the application database migration journey. In that journey, there was 5 items that I think that are really worth highlighting. Is that you have the schema that you're migrating, the data you're migrating, the code you're migrating. And we also talked about that, the database code there, but also the application or the API that you need to be concerned about migrating. What often gets overlooked is that you also have a set of tools that you'll need to use in the operational environment. When you were running in Oracle, you had maybe Oracle Enterprise Manager, or you're using RMAN for backups, and maybe you're using something for replication. And those sorts of things need to be thought about. How do I do that in Postgres? Well, EDB helps you with all those things. We've seen other vendors and other, either service providers or the software vendors. They can provide tooling that gets you part of the way with schema and data, and then there might be another set that will help you a little bit more with the database code itself. I think we offer probably the most assistance for your schema, data code, and interface. And then we also offer a comprehensive set of tools that really helps you manage your Postgres database in a way that you, even if it's not exactly the same work-alike kind of tools, in a way that you need that would be consistent with what you had with Oracle. And this is where tools like, if you have extreme high availability, we have tools like our Postgres BDR offering that can help with that. We have other tools that for backup and recovery and such. We've talked about compatibility as part of what we offer. And you might be asking, what does compatibility mean? For us, when we say compatibility, we have a version of Postgres Advanced Server, where we offer compatibility for the database object types, the specific data types for Oracle. PL SQL support is built into our Postgres database as a native procedural language. So it's not an emulator. It is a version of PL SQL running within Postgres. You also have Oracle-like data dictionary views. If you're a DBA, you'll be familiar with the all or DBA views or user views. We have a great number of those views replicated in our Postgres database. We also have built-in PL SQL utility packages like DBMS output, DBMS SQL. Those are the sorts of utilities that you've gotten used to using. We make those available as packages within our offering as well. And then we have Oracle-like database drivers that understand how to work with packages and procedures in a way that's more like Oracle, as well as understanding Oracle syntax. So we have those drivers available. And then we have Oracle-like
I apologize. It looks like we're
So
having.
things that you would have been,
Oh, sorry, Matt. We lost you there for a second. Could you just go back a little bit?
Crystal, could you tell me is it still on this slide?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Just 5 seconds. That's it.
Okay. So I was just saying about database drivers, it's important that we have drivers that understand more of the Oracle way of doing things. And we also have worker-like tools like EDB Plus that's akin to SQL Plus, EDB Loader that's akin to SQL Loader, tools that you may be familiar with. Also, when you think about this, what are the actual benefits of this? Really, it significantly reduces the amount of time and effort that's required to migrate to Oracle. And this really eases the transition from Oracle to Postgres for Oracle DBAs and developers alike. So that's what we mean by compatibility. As we think about our migrations and why we feel pretty strongly about our advanced server offering is that we have this tool called Migration Portal that's available to be used freely, that you upload a schema into, and it'll do an assessment and help you be able to convert it to something that would run into our EDB Advanced Server database. And since it's been in place, we've analyzed over 18 million DDL constructs, and we have seen that there's a great number of things that are specific to Oracle that often will be in your schema that you need to worry about converting, and things that wouldn't be easily converted to just Postgres by itself. So for instance, Pragma autonomous transaction is a convention that's often used to within procedures and functions to support logging and other things like that. There's no real easy solution for that in Postgres by itself. Our advanced server database has that capability. Also, we found hints in many of the schemas that we've analyzed, and hints are something that's not supported by Postgres. So our advanced server offering does support it. And then we have 32% of the schemas also refer to at least one of the EDB supported Oracle packages. And then beyond that, there's just syntax that is Oracle specific that probably doesn't show up in these results here, but would be predominantly in most schemas that get analyzed, such as like Oracle outer joins and things like connect by start with syntax for hierarchy type queries. All this shows that our compatibility addresses the practical challenges that you'll face when you're doing Oracle migrations. So what is the benefits of compatibility? Again, it lowers your cost and risk. So that really is a benefit to your business. Also, it's a benefit to your people. They can ease the transition from their skills in using Oracle to become Postgres experts as well. So they can use language and syntax and tools that they're familiar with as they become more familiar with the more native way of doing things in Postgres itself. And then it helps you with your application migrations, in that you can leverage existing infrastructure and the native PL SQL so that you can make that transition to Postgres quicker. At this point, I'm going to pause, and Crystal's going to offer another poll question, and then we'll get the results of that and move on.
Great. So question number 3 is, if you are considering a migration, what is the expected target environment? On-premises, virtual or physical machines, Kubernetes or containers, self-managed databases in the cloud, or managed database services? We'll give you just about 5 more seconds here to get your answers in. Okay, and it looks like the top response is on-premise, virtual or physical machines, followed by managed database services.
That's an interesting result. I think, we think today we naturally assume that we are seeing more and more activity going to the cloud. But we also at EDB have seen that there's still a lot of work being done on premises. And, there are certain environments where they're just not able to move to the cloud very easily. So I think that that's interesting results, but also I think EDB's got you covered if you look at that. So we definitely support on-premise migrations. We also can support Kubernetes and containers as targets, and running Postgres in a self-managed way in the cloud, or in our DBaaS offering with Big Animal. So just rest assured that we can help you on that journey. As speaking of the cloud, there was some interest in the cloud there, and the DBaaS offering in particular. We recently announced our Big Animal DBaaS. Currently, it's available with Microsoft Azure. Next year, it will be available in AWS. But it basically allows you to run either open source Postgres or our advanced server Postgres, which gives you that Oracle compatibility. And it takes care of a lot of the things that you would otherwise have to do yourself. So it basically gives you that continuous availability of Postgres in a scalable way. And then all of this comes with EDB expertise behind it all. So that's another option for our customers. I'm going to be doing a demo here in a bit. For the purposes of the demo, I've chosen to target a Big Animal database, but it's just as easy for us to target an on-premise database as well, or one of the other deployment options. Before we get to that, let's talk about some tools. So in general, the tooling that we have available to support your journey are going to be the migration portal. As I mentioned earlier, it's a free web-based tool that you can use it to assess your Oracle schema and then convert it to something that's compatible with Advanced Server. And then you have Migration Toolkit, which is primarily going to be used for doing snapshot data replication, and allows you to control things at a very granular level, and makes settings that are, will accommodate different performance tuning as far as moving the data goes. And then there's a option for a continuous replication is available through Replication Server. Basically, that provides change data capture for large migrations. And this will support those times when you have a need for minimal downtime or near zero downtime. And it provides the ability to perform replication between Oracle to Postgres, and also the other way. So if when you need a fallback position and migrate from Postgres to Oracle, it supports that as well. And it provides both the command line interface and a GUI for interacting with it. And then beyond the tools themselves, we also just offered a slew of different migration related services, professional services, that helps you with complex migrations and could augment your staff and just ensure that your migrations go well. So this should look familiar at this point. These are the steps in the journey, and I'm introducing this to show you where our tools and services fit into this journey. Okay. So first of all, we think about assessing feasibility. That's where the tool like Migration Portal comes into play. We also have a migration assessment service that will give you detailed information about your schemas, the complexity of the objects within that as far as migration might be concerned, as well as the level of effort. And then under planning, this is primarily going to be driven by professional services. We can help you with migration assessment, also reviewing your enterprise architecture and coming up with solution design. And we have a fair amount of tooling and capability in the migration of database schema, code, and data. First of all, we've talked about our Oracle compatibility layer. That provides you some built-in capability as far as migrations go. But then we have the migration portal to help with conversion of your schema, migration toolkit to help with data replication, as well as replication server for data replication. And then there's some other object extensions like database links and foreign data wrappers that some of our customers, as well as a professional services team, take advantage of when they do migrations. And then from a services perspective, we offer a quick deploy service, and that'll help get your environment set up, and embedded Postgres subject matter expert to help you with your migrations. From a migration of your applications, the interfaces, again, our compatibility layer is important for that, but we also offer Oracle compatible database drivers or connectors. The ones we have available are JDBC, ODBC, OCI, and .NET. In our experience, almost the largest percentage of the applications are going to be JDBC as well as ODBC, but we have worked with customers in OCI and .NET. The OCI is interesting in that it covers the bulk of the OCI functionality that, if for those applications that may have been written in that, it handles it with very little conversion that's needed. And then we have, again, embedded services to help you with migrations of those items. And for migration of reports and tools, EDB Plus and EDB Loader, I mentioned earlier, are tools that are equivalent, work-alike tools to Oracle's SQL Plus and SQL Loader. And then if you need some help migrating the SQL and the other aspects of those utilities and reports, our embedded services can help with that. And it's not popping up here. There we go. For testing migrations, we have a tool called Live Compare that can allow you to validate the data from your source and target. And Postgres Enterprise Manager is used to monitor your system and help with performance tuning. And then again, our embedded service can help with this as well. And then after you've done your testing and are ready to tune your system, tools like Postgres Enterprise Manager is important for that. And then you need to set up backup and restore sort of procedures and capabilities. Barman is a tool to help with backups and recoveries. We have a tool called EDB Failover Manager to support 4 nines types of high availability situations, and Postgres BDR for the higher levels, 5.9 type of high availability scenarios. We can bring Postgres BDR to bear for that. And then, of course, different services to help you optimize and configure your environment. And as far as supporting the cutover, replication server can support that fallback position. And then similar to when you're just doing a data migration, when you're replicating back to Oracle, you want to do a comparison. Live Compare can be used for that. And then services to help you with the cutover. So that leads us to the, I'm going to do a demo here, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen temporarily, and I'll reshare it with my desktop showing there. I'm going to try to walk through just looking at some DDL and SQL constructs in Oracle that may be tricky. I'm not going to focus too much time on those, but I do want to just highlight those. And then I'll use the migration portal to assess the Oracle schema and convert it, and use Migration Toolkit to migrate from Oracle to Advanced Server, and Live Compare to do a comparison. And then as time allows, I'll do a quick review of some items using a Postgres Enterprise Manager tool. So let me stop and reshare. And hopefully everybody can see my screen. Mark?
Yes.
Can you confirm that? All right. At this point, I've just got Oracle SQL Developer up. I want to show you that I have a schema. It's based off the HR schema that people are familiar with, but we've extended it so that it includes some tricky items in there. Just first of all, most of some of the more interesting things is that you may be familiar with SQL, Oracle's ability to do hierarchical queries using a start with connect by. So there's a view in there that has that. That's not available in Postgres, but our advanced server has that in it. Outer joins is another concept that's kind of, Oracle has a unique take on it. They have this convention of using a plus sign in parentheses. Postgres itself wouldn't understand that, although our advanced server edition does. And there's some other items in here as well. Let me just pull up this one. That's bid-and function. In current versions of Postgres, that bid-and function doesn't exist. And there's just a different way of doing that in Postgres. I will say that Advanced Server 14 is coming out. We're actually implementing that. But I'll show you an example of getting around that using the conventions to date. We also, Oracle has packages. Postgres doesn't have packages, but the Advanced Server does support that. There's also in Oracle in this database, there's a trigger that includes a pragma autonomous transaction. So those are all things that might be otherwise tricky for a normal Postgres migration. I've logged into our migration portal, and this is where we start the journey. I will upload some DDL. First of all, I'll name this. As you can see, I've probably done this more than once. The version of Oracle that I'm moving from is Oracle 18c, and I have a file that I extracted the SQL that we'll use already. I'll upload that, and then I'll just hit the create and assess. And this will run. You should see the wheel moving there and the progress bar. And in the end, you have a schema that's assessed. You'll notice that there were 3 failed objects there. There were 40 that were system repaired, and currently there's none that I've repaired myself, and there's 12 that just passed as is, and the rest are just migrated just fine. So I don't think that you should be scared to see some incompatibilities. It's almost a given that you're moving from an Oracle source to a Postgres source, that you're going to have some level of those. But let's just look at how we deal with those. So I mentioned earlier that some of the more interesting things in our demo schema there were in the area of views. You'll see that there are 7 views, and that 3 of those failed. So let's look at those. And they're highlighted here with those the red indicator signs there. So if I look at that, at the bottom here it says syntax error at or near position. We have a knowledge base that you can see whether that exists in there or not. I happen to know that it's associated with this syntax error for reserved words. And then we offer some assistance in like how you go about accommodating that. We actually have a couple different approaches. The problem is that this position here is a reserved word. And so we either need to quote that or we need to change that. So for the purpose of this demo, I'm just going to change that to be quoted, and then I'll reassess that one. And you'll see that it now is reassesses as being successful. If I look at the error view, I mentioned earlier about bid and being a trouble for previous versions. Let's look at what it says about that. So it says that the workaround is to just use this convention. So there's an operator for that. I'll update that. And then I'll reassess. And now that's successful. And then we have one more. And this is sort of a contrived example, but points out that the round function in Postgres needs to explicitly have this second argument be an integer, and for whatever reason it was created with a floating point there, and the solution to that is either to just make that be 2 like that, or you cast it as an int. And so I've reassessed that, and I can refresh the tree. I'll look at my migration demo, and now it's showing that I have 0 failed. I have repaired 3 items, and I'm now 100% compatible. The migration portal does offer the ability to do a report. At this point, it's less interesting because I've made the fixes, but it gives you an idea of the things that we repaired automatically for you and the things that have been that may have failed and that you need to be addressed yet. So we have a schema that we've converted, and now we can upload that into a database. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to upload this into a big animal instance. So I'm going to move to the cloud. Yes, that HR schema is good. Choose that big animal as a target. I've already got a big animal instance running, so I'll just hit next at this point. And let's go get some information from that. I have a, I need a copy of the host. Paste that here. And the database, I want to actually, I pre-created a database, an empty database called HR Plus app. And I'm going to do this as a HR Plus admin user. Supply the password for that. And let me just test that connection first. Okay, it says the connection was successful. And let's hit next. So we'll load that schema into that database. All right, it says the migration is successful. We can hit done. I'm going to pop up. It just minimize that. And okay, I've connected to a database. First of all, you'll see an HR Plus database, app database in there. I'm in that database now as that HR Plus admin user. I can look at what are the schemas that are in there. I have this HR schema in there. I can look at the tables in there. You can see that it's moved over countries, departments, all those tables. If I were to look, try to run a query against one of those, there's no data in it. I could look for views in here. Let's query that, say that management view. So there's no data in the system at this point. This is where we would move to Migration Toolkit, which I said is a command line tool. And I'll actually move data. So it's connected to Oracle. There was a configuration file where you supply all the connection information. I already did that ahead of time. And it's moving data from Oracle into Postgres at this point. So now if we were to go back here and run some of these queries, you'll see now I have data in the countries table. If I look at this management chain view, this is the one that had that start with a connect by hierarchical query type of view there. So we now have data over there. That gives us a level of confidence that things have worked. But maybe the next step is actually to run our live compare tool to validate the data. So I did. And again, it has a configuration file where you establish the connections criteria, and it's off running that at this point. All right, so it gives you some summary information. Basically, there was no errors. There's some warnings. Those warnings, I think if we were to look at the log file, which is about one of the tables doesn't have a primary key. So it's just warning about that as part of its comparison. And then we can actually dig into, look at the output of this. So. And we can see that, it did comparison between the two. And, here's the total number of rows there. If there were differences, there would have been some additional output that would have identified what those differences were, and then we could have been able to work on resolving those. So that concludes the demo. I'm going to bring up my presentation again. All right, hopefully everybody's seeing it. So let's talk a little bit about our professional services. I mentioned it earlier. We have customers who do migrations on their own. We have partners that help with migrations, but we also have a really dedicated professional services staff for that. We do have over 15 years of doing it, so we can help customers. And usually you're going to be calling on professional services for the more complex migrations. There's probably 50% of, or roughly that can be done on your own if you're experienced. But there's another 50% that you're probably going to need to call in an expert, and EDB can help with that. Another reason to call on our professional services is that you may not have the resources in-house to do it. You may not have the expertise. Maybe you need just some help in assessing and prioritizing and planning your migrations. Let's say if you're looking at your full estate and just understanding which of those applications make sense to move and how do I move them and plan for that. That's where our professional services really is important. I also want to look at we mentioned earlier, as part of the migration journey that you get to the end, you have to work in an operating environment. As part of that, you need a set of tools to help you with that. So if you're used to Oracle, you may be familiar with a set of tools and capabilities in these areas that are shown on the left-hand side there: monitoring and management, backup and recovery, high availability, advanced replication needs, cross-data comparison, auditing, geospatial data. We have answers for those, both in our on-premise and IaaS type cloud environments, as well as our big animal. And you can see the tools that are listed there. I think the message here is that you should take away is that you have certain operational needs, and then EDB can provide those. And finally, that concludes what we want to talk about. I think the next steps, if you are interested in more information, is to contact us, and we'd be able to schedule a deeper dive session with you to talk about your projects and talk about your migration needs. You can begin using our migration portal today just to try it out and see, how your schema would convert, and engage with us in a migration discovery exercise. And then finally, we've written a white paper. I think it was published a few weeks ago at this point, that details the migration journey, the processes and tools, covers much of what we discussed here today, something that you can read on your leisure and get a better understanding. Of course, reach out to us if you have any other questions. At this point, that concludes what we want to present. We'll turn it over to Crystal to let us know if there's any questions.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Matt. I don't see any questions that have come through at this point, and we are kind of at the top of the hour, so I apologize if there's anything that we weren't able to get to today, but that is all of the time that we have. So thank you so much for joining us for the webinar. We will be sharing this recording again along with the slides with you as soon as possible. So I hope you have a great day.
Very good.
Thank you.
Bye.